Good morning still, yes. How y'all doing? Thanks for being here. Wow, this group's a little more awake than the last one. I appreciate that. My name's Derek Vidal. I'm normally here as the RME guy, but today I'm here as more the Syntax guy because we're going to talk about another brand. For those of you who don't know who Syntax is, we are the worldwide distributor for RME. We also distribute these other 5 brands, and today we'll be talking about Appsys Pro Audio, which is a German manufacturer similar to RME and Ferrofish. This is a converter company, and it's really about solving connectivity challenges that you're going to face when customers have to put formats together that don't normally talk together. As you know, we don't have a universal format out there, so many times you have to make analog talk to Dante, talk to Maddie, talk to all kinds of different stuff. So we're going to talk about the Multiverter and the Flexiverter. So this is a very easy line to understand. The Multiverter is a universal format converter. The Flexiverter, as the name suggests, are little flexible format converter boxes that you can put together. And these boxes only map for $6.99, so this is not an expensive solution for your customer. So let's talk about formats. Every format in the industry that is used is supported by Apsis. So this is one of those rare brands that no matter what format you're talking about, Apsis can be that go-to brand for you, that there's probably something I can call Dan or Crystal at Online Marketing and say, hey, what does Apsis have that can solve this connectivity project that I have? So every format, AVB, Maddie, Dante, ADAT, AS50, which is, for those of you who aren't familiar with AS50, that's the format that Midas and Behringer uses, and we do all forms of Maddie. So Apsis is, in fact, a German manufacturer, so none of this is coming out of any other country. This is all made in Germany. And the first product, which is their flagship product, is in fact the Multiverter, which we have here in the rack, and we will have office hours so you can take a closer look at it. Now, the Multiverter is a single one rack space unit packed with a lot of audio formats in it. It's all digital. There's no analog here. So we have Dante, we have Maddie, and a lot of different types, 64 channels of ADAT audio in and out, and even 96 channels of AES50. On the front panel, we can dial in our headphone mix, we can dial in mono or stereo, we can obviously set up who our master clock is, we can go to the routing section of the front panel and use it as a patch bay and route different audio inputs to different outputs, and you can do several outputs at the same time. You also have a preset area and a unique feature which I think is extremely useful, which is a test tone, where you can literally send a test tone out every single output at the same time. So this can be a centerpiece of a studio, this can be a centerpiece of your front of house or a church or even an installation where you're bridging a lot of different formats. So let's take a look at the back panel, because most audio folks, that's where we like to gander, that's where all the magic is, right? So we have 64 channels of Dante in and out, primary and secondary, which is an audio network. We have 96 channels of AS50 in and out, which is another audio network used by Midas, Behringer, Clark Technique, and there's some other manufacturers. We have the ability to connect 3 different Maddie ports, 2 of which can work simultaneously for a total of 128 channels of Maddie. We also have tons of ADAT light pipe in and out, so 64 channels there. And we have this little HDMI port, which is called a FlexiLink, and this allows you to connect a multiverter to another multiverter and pass up to 192 channels of audio. It also can connect to a Flexiverter. So I'm going to show you some typical setups, where you might sell this, what problems you might solve with this. So that FlexiLink, we're going to talk in a little bit more detail in a moment. You'll notice on the back, this is made for 24/7, 365-day use with triple redundant power supply. Also, we have the ability to trigger all of the presets with MIDI. There's even Yamaha support for sending head amp data down the MIDI over Maddie, or it's not MIDI over Maddie, but it's over the Maddie channel. So we can actually connect Yamaha gear to this and control it remotely. All right, last but not least, we have this USB port. This is not an audio interface, but this is where you can set up a computer, obviously update the software, but also control it remotely. So if this were a centerpiece in my studio and I wanted to use a GUI to control the routing, this is how I would do it. And the advantage of using the GUI to control the routing is I can do individual channel routing. So when I connect this to my computer, open up a web browser, and put in the IP address that it tells me to in the manual, I can literally control this unit remotely. I can do full stream routing like you see in the screen above me, but I can also go and expand. So this is one of those rare converters that can do single channel routing, like MADI channel 13 to Dante channel 7 to AS50 channel 12. So you can get in there and do very granular routing. So this is perfect for any setup that you need that level of control. Very easy to access. The last thing about the multiverter you need to know is it has an optional sample rate converter. So sample rate conversion, as the name would suggest, might be a scenario where you want to run a 96K front of house system and connect it to a 48 kilohertz monitor system. Another thing that comes up quite commonly is, let's say the Super Bowl halftime show is a perfect example. You have the people doing the broadcast, and then you have the people doing the band at halftime. They need to share audio just like you would in analog, but they don't want to run their systems all on the same master clock. So a sample rate converter like this allows you to share audio just as you would in an analog setup, but ESPN and the people running the sound for the band can be on their own master clock. So when the band goes away and they turn off their system, ESPN still has their clock running. So this is another use for sample rate conversion. So the multiverter is the flagship, and we're going to come back to that in different wiring diagrams. But now I want to show you what you can do with the flexiverters. The flexiverters are all these little modular $699 price point map boxes, and you can choose any format that you see up behind me and create a converter that may not even exist on the market. So I could do MADI to Dante, I can do MADI to ADAT, I can do MADI to AVB, I can do Dante to MADI, Dante to AVB, and on it goes. But here's where the flexiverter gets super flexible. You have all of these auxiliary cards, which start at $299 map, and you, as a sales engineer, can create whatever solution you need to create for your customer, whether it's in the studio, whether it's live sound, whether it's a church, whatever formats they're trying to get to talk to each other, we probably can solve it with this line. So this is super flexible. On the last slide where we talk about the flexiverters in terms of what's made up, in terms of on the back panel, there's these little dip switches, and this is where the user can assign what the audio routing is, because you might have that auxiliary card route audio to the back of the flexiverter, but you might also choose to route the audio from the auxiliary card out that flexi connector, which is going over to another flexiverter or a multiverter. And that's going to make more sense when I put up the diagrams. So 3 ways to sell or install a flexiverter. Use it as a standalone, use it with another flexiverter, or pair it with a multiverter. In the standalone mode, some examples are going to just be your simple one format to another format. Dante to MADI, Dante to ADAT, and on it goes. We can do ASEBU, etc. Now, when scenario number 2, you actually can do up to 4 formats of conversion. So if you get a customer that says, well, I need to connect ASEBU, I need to connect my Dante, and I might have some MADI gear. Well, I don't have to sell them a multiverter with all this extra I/O they don't need. I can just do a flexiverter with the appropriate auxiliary cards and pair them in a single rack space. Or the multiverter is something where you have all of these formats that your customer needs with a sample rate conversion, but maybe there's one format they need to do, like 96K Dante to 48K Dante. So they could use another flexiverter and connect it to the multiverter. Or they want to do ASEBU, which doesn't come natively on the multiverter. They might add a flexiverter with the AS to a multiverter setup. So these are the 3 different ways on which you can use the flexiverters. So let's take a closer look at the standalone, because that's going to be the more common scenario for most people. So you can see all the different auxiliary cards. And what I want you to pay specific attention to is the channel counts. How many MADI channels are there? How many AS channels are there? How many AVB channels are there, etc.? Because that might determine whether I go with a flexiverter Dante and a MADI card, or whether I go with a flexiverter MADI with a Dante card, those types of things. So just something to keep in mind. Now, if I'm going to use 2 flexiverters together, notice there's optional rack kits. I can do a single flexiverter in a 1 RU space, or I can do 2 flexiverters. There's actually a rack kit for that. And you have all these possible pairings. And we're going to show you some typical applications where pairing 2 flexiverters might be the way you go for your customer. So just bear with me when we get to that. The last And more complex scenario might be a multiverter with a FlexiVerter added to it because your client needs the ability to bridge a lot of different formats. And the one format that's not on the multiverter that they might want is either AVB or ASCBU, so you can get there with a FlexiVerter and take advantage of the sample rate conversion that's on board. So my favorite part of this is, what are the typical situations that I, as a salesperson, am going to run into with a customer where this is going to make a lot of sense? Let's talk about the most common one we get, which is, I need to do Maddie to Dante. Now, for those of you who aren't as familiar, is there anyone here that's not familiar with Maddie in the room? Anyone going to even admit it, or everyone's going to be? So, okay, good. Well, Maddie's like 64 channels of ADAT light pipe and a cable. So if I want to do 64 channels of Maddie to Dante, I might take a FlexiVerter Dante and choose a Maddie card. Makes a lot of sense, right? You need to know, in this case, what Maddie port your customer has. Is it an optical Maddie port? Is it a coax Maddie port? Or do we need to use the SFP version? And the reason you might use SFP is because you want to do single mode Maddie, which is optical over a long range, for example. Or another way to do Maddie to Dante is go with a FlexiVerter Maddie and use an auxiliary Dante card. What's the advantage of this over the other one? Well, the FlexiVerter Maddie has all of the Maddie ports on the back, where the other scenario, which is a little bit less money, you have to know which Maddie port your customer has. So there's an example of more than one way to skin a cat, so to speak. What does this look like in the real world? Let's say I have a console. I plan to get a Dante card, but wait a minute, the Dante card isn't available, and the installation needs to happen in 2 weeks, and we're being told there's not going to be a Dante card for some unforeseeable future. Well, I can take a look at putting a Maddie card in here, look at my Apsis menu of options, and depending on what I'm trying to do, I might go Maddie out into a Maddie card, put that Maddie card into a FlexiVerter Dante, and for really not a lot of money compared to what digital converters normally cost, I can have a solution that's shipping right now, and this is in stock. Or I might want to connect it to an M32 digital console from Midas, so maybe I'll go with a FlexiVerter AS50. This is just one hypothetical example. There's really more than I can go through in 20 minutes. Now, let's take another situation that comes up. AS50, which is X32 Behringer or M32 Midas to Dante. And again, I can select the appropriate FlexiVerter that I need, which in this example would be an AS50, and then I can use a Dante card in the back. So I'm creating a solution that's pretty hard to get as a standalone converter. Now, we take a look at an M32 console. We can connect that to our existing Appsys products that we need for this particular project, and we set up the card we need. We go to the FlexiVerter that we need, and now we have a viable solution that's available, and we can solve the problem and get it in the installation and hit the deadline that the client's trying to hit. Another scenario we run into a lot is ASCBU to Dante. Probably not a surprise at this point. It's a FlexiVerter AES3 with an auxiliary Dante card, but notice the channel count. The ASCBU channel count is only 16 by 16, where Dante at 48 kilohertz is 64 channels, and maybe the customer says, well, I need AS to Dante. The follow-up question is, well, how many AS channels do you need? Now, if we go with what I currently have selected here, that's fine, and I'm going to show you a way to get even more channels without adding a bunch of gear to make it happen. So let's take a console. We're going to go with a Dante output. We're going to go over to our Dante card, and we're going to install that Dante card into a FlexiVerter AS, which is going to have D-sub Tascam Pin 2 wiring connector on the back. We're going to run those channel snakes over to our amp rack, which only in this example has ASCBU input. So these are just some typical scenarios you might run into in a live sound or even studio, because there's a lot of studio gear that has AES on it, so this could be a great solution. But what if I need more AS channels? This is where the power of pairing FlexiVerters together in a rack becomes really apparent, and you're going to start to see how this works. So again, I go with the FlexiVerter AS3, I go with my auxiliary Dante card, but this time, and forgive the blurry picture, this time I put two FlexiVerter AS3s in a rack, okay? And remember, those FlexiVerter AS3s each have 16 by 16 ASCBU in them. But notice on the left, I have an auxiliary Dante card. That's how I'm going to get to Dante. And on the right, I have another AS3 auxiliary card. So you might be looking at the right side and going, well, that's kind of weird. I have a converter that's AS3, and I'm putting an auxiliary card in that converter. I'm not really converting anything. That's kind of strange. Why would I do that? Well, the FlexiLink cable is where this starts to make sense, because I can pass audio from the right side to the left side and route that all out the Dante. And in this situation, I have 24 channels of AS-EBU on the right. I have 16 channels of AS on the left, which gives me a total in this one single rack space of 40 channels of AS-EBU, all on D-sub connectors, so I'll need the appropriate cabling. And then with those dip switches on the back that I showed you, you can tell all of those FlexiVerters send all that audio over to this Dante port. And that's just one of many examples of how you might, as a sales engineer, pair two FlexiVerters together with that FlexiLink cable and put whatever auxiliary cards your client needs to make the connectivity that they need to make. And the nice thing is you could sell this without all of those aux cards in the back and tell your customer, hey, and this is scalable, so if you decide you might purchase this piece of equipment that has this format that you're not sure how you're going to talk to it, you can keep in mind that you can get this auxiliary card to make that happen. What about the multiverter? What are some examples of how I might sell the multiverter? What scenarios might the customer bring up to me where the multiverter is the product I want to think about? So remember, the multiverter has sample rate conversion capability. So let's just take a live sound setup that comes up often, especially with churches. There's a lot of Behringer X32s out in the world. They only speak 48K. They do AS50. There's a lot of Yamaha out there that's Dante. So here's a nice little solution. I have a front of house system running at 96 kilohertz. It's a Yamaha CL series. I set up my Dante network as I normally would. So I have a switch, I run Ethernet cable, I run it to my stage box, and everybody's happy on the left side of my picture. I'm running a 96K front of house system. Great. How do I connect that to my monitor console? Either because I don't have a card, or when I originally bought the Behringer, I wasn't planning on doing this. So I can put in a multiverter, which is going to solve a lot of different problems at the same time. The first thing I'll do is I'll connect Dante to it, and now everything with the red dotted lines is a 96 kilohertz audio network running Dante. Great. Now I can sample rate convert that down to 48K, connect the AS50 to the multiverter, and now those two systems are talking to each other. Plus, since the multiverter has all this other capability, I could maybe run the ADAT outputs to a personal monitoring system, say an input expander on a MyMix system, and go MADI out to a playback rig running Ableton for my praise team and do simultaneous recording. So this one box can make all of this happen very easily, and everything can be patched, yes, with Dante Controller, but also with the multiverter. I can even substitute the MADI-Face USB with a Fireface UFX Plus if I want, or maybe even use an RME DigiFace Dante. So I have all of those different capabilities with this one piece. Another thing that's coming up more and more, especially since Dante is getting harder and harder to get, is more and more in the live sound world, we're seeing more and more AVB than we used to, and we're getting requests for how do we integrate AVB to Dante. Now, I'm never a big fan about talking about product that isn't shipping today, but obviously it's on here, so I'll at least address it. The auxiliary AVB card will be out in a couple of months, so you could go with a FlexiVerter Dante and an auxiliary AVB, but you're going to notice that card only has 16 in, 16 out AVB, or 32 in, no out, or no in, and 32 out. Great, I can go that route. But this client, we had a call from Disney. They wanted to do 128 channels of AVB to 128 channels of Dante because they had a lot of QSC in the park, but they have certain parts of their facility that are AVB, and they needed to bridge it together. So another way to do this is I can put together a combination rig like what we have here with an RME piece and the Appsys piece and create a very slick 128 channels of Dante to 128 channels of AVB. So I put a 12 mic in here. I connect my Dante cards to my Dante network because each of these FlexiVerter MADIs has an auxiliary Dante card. And then I connect my MADI coax and my MADI optical to each box separately, which is going to pass audio from the RME to the Apsis. And on the RME side, I have 128 channels of AVB in and out. And on the Apsis side, I have 128 channels of Dante in and out. And this solution is really not that expensive for that kind of channel count. Plus, with the RME, I have 12 mic inputs and some other IOs that just are a bonus. I could certainly substitute that with a 4-channel version, still have the same 128 channels of AVB and MADI connectivity, or I could even do, as we've done here, and we'll be showing in our office hours, the M1610 Pro. So, thank you for your time.